Hello. Today I want to talk about arrays and for loops. I've seen a lot of people get confused about how to run individual functions on arrays. They might want to subscribe to something or something like that, and they try to use the dot subscribe or some of those functions on the array itself and are not sure why that's not working. So today, I'm hoping to shed some light on why that doesn't work, why that shouldn't work, and some strategies on um, how to deal with that properly going forward. So, in today's example, we have capture points. You can see the creative device here. And in that we have the capture points that are defined as seen. And what'll happen is when the game starts, it's going to subscribe to the the event for capturing the area. All right, so let's take a look at the code that I've written, and we can talk a little bit about arrays. Uh, you'll see a lot of people talk about arrays as containers, which they are, but that doesn't seem to hold a lot of meaning to a lot of people. So I think of arrays more like words on a page. And you might have functions for words like define or highlight or bold. Where define will give you a definition, um, so on and so forth. You wouldn't run those functions on an entire page. You would only want to run those functions on words or sets of words, um, where a page could be a container that holds a whole bunch of words. Um, so instead, you would want to use some sort of loop to go through the words that you want to run these functions on if you had a container that had them. So that's where the for loop comes in. The for loop will allow you to cycle through an array in order to run functions on individual items in the array or you know define words in the on the page. All right, so you can see we have our array defined here for capture points. You'll notice that I used plural. The convention I try to follow is if I'm doing an array, I want to use plural for the name. That way it's obvious later on that there are supposed to be more than one in there. And then when I use for loops or look at individual ones, I'll use the singular version of that. So what we're doing here is taking this array and we're going to run the control change event subscribe on each one using for loops to do it. Now I do have an array index here. This is just to be to illustrate what happens when we go through a for loop, how it cycles through each index. We're not actually using this to pull individual items. It's just to illustrate the process. So I'm going to have two functions here. One is example one of for loops because there's actually two ways to do for loops. So example one will show you one way and example two will show you the other way. In example one, we actually just take our um, array. This is the array itself. So the array always goes to the right of the colon here. And then some named object to represent each index in the array. So what this is going to do if you have three items is run this set of code three times using this inside your for loop. So this becomes your named object. This very well could be anything. So just like that, I can change that named object, but I try to use names that make sense. Whoops, capture point. That way, when I'm reading the code later, I can more easily see what the intent was. So basically, this is going to cycle through the array as many times as there are items in the array and run this code. Each time through, it's actually going to tell us what index we're on because of this array, of this index integer, and it's going to increment here. With example 2, it's a little more complicated. We actually set up a new index integer in the for loop itself. So this is creating a named object that is initially set to 0, an integer, and every single time it goes through the for loop, it's going to increment that by 1. And it'll go until it reaches this number. Now you'll notice that we have a dot length -1. We do that because arrays are, they call it zero index. They start at 0 and work their way up. So if you have 3 items in an array, then your last array index is going to be 2. Index 0, index 1, index 2. And so you want to make sure you stop before you get past the end of the array. And if you're using this format, then you're going to have to use an if statement to create a named object. And again, I'm doing the singular here, pointing at the array and the individual index within the array. Remember, this is going to count up each time it goes through. And so if this is on the third index, then this will be a 2 here and a 2 here. And then we'll end up having an object here that we can run functions against. And this piece here is just to show you that the subscribe is working. Now, if I want to run a subscribe on everything that's in an array, I will always use this syntax here. If I want to get more granular, like, I want to set the first item aside to do something else with, and then maybe I'll run it on everything else, or I don't know, all kinds of different scenarios out there where you may want to get a little more choosy on which items in the array you want to do something to. In that case, I'll use this syntax here and get a little creative with what my index is, where I might stop, that sort of thing. All right, so we you can see here that we have example 1 enabled right now. So let's actually minimize our code. Let's push changes. Wait for it. Wait for it. All right, let's take a look in the game. So if we go grab these, we should see the print statement that shows that the subscribe is working. There we go. Saw it up in the upper left there. And again. And the last one. And then after this, I'm going to show you actually a better place to look for the logs. So if we switch back to UEFN, if you look at this output log down here, you can actually see the same stuff. And I find it's easier to look at here. Don't get bogged down by a lot of the warnings and errors here. This sort of thing is actually pretty normal. But what's nice here is because I put this in my on begin, it makes it really easy to see where we started. So then you can see that we looped through our our array, and this is our first pass. our second pass, and our third pass to get to array index 2. As a reminder, this is the code that did that. So let's take a look at example 2. Let's comment out example 1 and uncomment example 2. And if you're wondering how I did that with the keyboard, I hold control and hit the slash, and that toggles the comment. So I just control S to save. Capture point 2 is now active. And we'll know that that's the active one because the way I do my print statements is I usually will include the function so that it's easy to read. So like if we go back and look at our output log, we know what function is generating the log in question. So we're all saved here. Let's build verse, push, wait for it, wait for it. Fortunately, verse doesn't take that long to push generally. And start our game. So just as before, we should have the same result where we get our print statements, but we're using a different type of for loop to get there. And the last one. Excellent. So if we switch back to UEFN again, take a look at our log, we can see that we used example two's code. Um, and the subscribes worked. Now, if we look at example 2, you'll notice here we're using the index that we created here. Again, this is a named object that could be whatever you want it to be. Sometimes people will just call it IDX for index. I don't really feel like you're saving a lot of characters there. And I feel like it's a little bit less clear. So I prefer to use the word index, but it can be whatever you want. So I'm going to switch this back because it makes me feel better. And that's basically everything. So let's just go over a couple of points real quick. As a reminder, this is the array itself, and this is going to be the named object you use inside the for loop. If you try to do this, and actually I'll do it just so you can see what the error message looks like. If we take capture point, the array, and try to uh, control change event subscribe area captured, you're going to see that we get an error message, unknown member, because you can't do this to the array itself. So if you're seeing an issue like this, it probably means you're doing this against an array. And if you hover over it, you can see where it actually tells us that, where we get the square brackets. So that should, I hope, shed some light on arrays and for loops. If you have found this tutorial helpful, please be sure to like and subscribe and share with others that you think might need it. Thank you.